Hello everyone, my name is Theo Eschart from Henry Stewart Events, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, The State of Creative Ops, Strategies and Insights for 2024, kindly sponsored by Rocketium. During the session, please send through your questions at any point using the questions box on your GoToWebinar side panel. Also a reminder that a recording of this session will be sent to you tomorrow, so you can view it again at your own pace. Now it's my great pleasure to pass you over to Satesh Siro, co-founder and CEO of Rocketium, who will be moderating this session. Thank you, and over to you.
Thanks, Theo. Welcome to you all, and we'll have some more participants rolling in. And for all those who are listening in on the recording, hello to you as well. A big thanks to Henry Stewart Events for organizing this webinar. We are really excited to bring to you the state of creative ops, the first report of this kind that is research-backed and talks to several hundred operators in this space. And the primary goal of today is to walk through this report and give commentary from experts who have been in this space and have done this. So with me, the experts that we have are Jerry Rackley. He's the chief analyst at Demand Metric and the assistant department head of marketing at Oklahoma State University. He has led the research report and will be walking us through that. That will be the first part of today's event. Also joining me are Alexandra. She's a VP of Global Operations at the Estee Lauder Companies, managing several brands and doing creative ops on a daily basis. And then we have Anush Prabhu. He's the former Global Chief Strategy Officer of GroupM's largest agency, Essence Mediacom. So following the research report that we'll walk through, where we'll have all of these folks chiming in with their experiences, we will also have a panel session that goes into some more details. Jerry, if you could go to the next slide. The primary goal of this research report and why we commissioned this is that across the world, as we speak to people who are in the marketing and creative space, we hear about the additional challenges they have over and above all the geopolitical tensions that are going on and general economic slowdown. There's a lot more demands of the marketing team, a lot more that they are supposed to deliver. Do more with less is no longer just a cliche. It's something that leadership is always going to teams with. And with AI coming in, everyone is questioning what is the role of their team? How are they supposed to bring in efficiencies? How are they supposed to operate better? And we said, what better way to do this than to speak with a wide swath of people who are doing this on a daily basis? And that's the basis of this research study. So we'll have a very interesting conversation today. People who have done this will chime in with their inputs. And Jerry, over to you to talk about the research methodology and what we actually found.
Thank you, Satesh. I've already been introduced. Just to refresh you, I am the chief analyst at Demand Metric Research Corporation, and we worked together with Rocketium to do this study late last year. And it was really a wonderful study because of the participation we were able to get from both people on the marketing side and the creative side of the house. So we collected quite a bit of data, and it was very equally divided. And what we want to do now is go through and show you some of the key findings. But first, let me just tell you a bit more about the methodology. We fielded a survey. Some of you on this webinar may have participated. So if you did, thank you for that. We fielded the survey for roughly a month, and we were able to collect 210 complete responses. We had logic built in the survey to ensure that we got an equal number or relatively equal number of people both in creative roles and in marketing roles. And as you can see from the slide on your screen, it worked out very nicely. We got exactly a 50-50 split. So we feel quite good about both of these roles being represented in the survey. So with that bit of background on the methodology, let's get right into some of the key findings. The report that came out of this study, there will be a QR code you'll see on the screen as we get toward the end of our presentation, and you'll have a chance to go download it, and I hope you will. It's an extensive report, probably about 60 pages in length. So what you're going to get today is a very abbreviated version of what we feel like are some of the key findings. So let's start, and let's begin by looking at satisfaction with the creative process. And what we did was we asked, how satisfied are you with your process from initial brief to final creative? And you can see 30% were dissatisfied, and we're really talking about efficiency here. So obviously this means 70% were satisfied with their process, but something that's spelled out in the report itself is it's worse for B2C organizations, where only 58% were satisfied with their process. Unfortunately, the scope of our study didn't allow us to pursue why it was worse in B2C, but the fact is, it is worse from a satisfaction perspective. Another key finding was this: 40% of our study participants said they have a single source of truth for asset and creative performance data. Once again, we found out with B2C organizations, it's worse, where half do not have this single source of truth. To move on to another key finding, 61% of firms in the study, these with the largest ad budgets, and by that we're looking at $10 million or more, they are experiencing delays in campaign launches because of the creative process. And what we found is that it's for smaller firms with smaller budgets, less than $10 million, they're experiencing delays too, but only about half of them report that they are. So what we're seeing is that as budgets grow, the problem gets worse. And that's a theme we're going to see continue through some of these other key findings.
Hey, Jerry, this is, so just want to kind of, the interesting thing for me on this page also is that the variation you mentioned between the satisfaction and the people who are actually saying, you know what, I actually have frequent delays in the campaign. Over the years, there's no question that our communications has gotten way more complex, right? It requires more people, more teams, more efforts to kind of manage and push out there, no matter whether you're dealing with a Coca-Cola or you're dealing with a $2 million budget. Things have gotten complex. And in this scenario, what this almost tells me is that people have got used to being okay with a little bit of delay, a little bit of problems, and unless you really, really ask them, they are not saying that they are dissatisfied, given the fact that 61% of people already kind of experience delays, not to mention other issues they may be having. So it's an interesting finding there that you have.
Well, yes, Anusha, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. My background includes being a marketing director and a marketing VP, so I haven't always been in academia. And I think you're right that there's just sort of this certain attitude of, well, that's just the way it is. There's just going to be delays and there's nothing you can do about it. So perhaps the actual level of satisfaction isn't really represented fully by this statistic. But yes, I think you made a great insight. Thank you for sharing that. So one other key finding before we move on to another set of key findings is just more informational, is 2/3, a little over 2/3 rely on agencies for creative content. And as you get into the details of the report, you'll find that over half of our study participants report that they work with 4 or more agencies on creative content. So that's just sort of the first picture we're giving you of some of these key findings. Let me move on to some others. And again, I want to encourage my colleagues on this webinar to share their insights, as Anush just did. And also, those of you listening in, we do want your questions, so please take advantage of the ability to enter questions for us, which we'll get to as we near the end of our session. So let's look at a few more of these key findings. 52% of firms in the study, these are the ones with the largest ad budgets, are unable to utilize their MarTech channels to full effectiveness because of the delays in the creative process, or I should say the process inefficiencies we have mentioned previously. And again, to stay with the theme I started on the last slide, this problem only gets worse as budgets grow. Another finding is that, and this one I think is very interesting because it's 100%. So rarely do you have this degree of solidarity in a study, but everyone said who has budgets of $10 million or more, they would refresh their creative more often if it were easy to do. Easier to do, I should say. 20% of people in the study tell us that they have to adapt their creative to 7 or more channels. So didn't really surprise me that there were lots of channels that the people in this study were using to deploy their creative across. What was equally interesting to me, it's not on the screen, but it is in the study report, is that these people in the study are adapting their creative assets to serve 15 or more audiences or audience segments. That's 22% of them are doing that. So we have lots of channels and we have lots of audience and audience segments, which we all know just creates or increases the complexity of the task. Another key finding was that 42% of people with the largest ad budgets report their cycle time is 10 or more days. That's from the initial request to approved creative. I really had no preconceived notion before we did this study. So I wish I could tell you based on my experience whether this was great or whether this was terrible. I don't know where it is on that spectrum in terms of cycle time, but perhaps some of my colleagues on this webinar can comment on whether they think that's about right or good or not so good. But that's what we found just as a benchmark.
Let me add something there, Jerry.
Yes.
When we work with a certain type of customer, which is in e-commerce, more nimble, agile, running a lot of sale events, we had always heard from those customers that doing something that takes 10 days is absolutely unacceptable because the duration of their sale event sometimes is 3 days. Imagine a Black Friday sale or something. I have maybe a price change that I want to do, or there is some new offer that I want to run. It is impossible that any change that takes 10 days could actually have an effect on a sale that is happening in 3 days, right? So that's why when we did the research study, this is something we were curious about. When we shared some of these findings with other enterprises that we are speaking with, they say, wow, some of your customers get content in 10 days. That's amazing. We take 8 weeks to get it. And so you're absolutely right. There are people on a very big spectrum over here. So 10 days could be very good for some companies who are, like you earlier pointed out, that's how the way it is. They are used to a much longer cycle time.
I also think, Satish, it depends on what kind of creative we are talking about, because there's so much of variation when we talk about creative. When you talk about 10 days, my first reaction would have been, wow, that's way less time than it should be, right? Because there's so much involved in digging out an insight around people, coming up with an idea, if you think of the largest context in which the idea lives. When you talk about, more, churning out creative that really drives response and more of a performance-driven activation and e-commerce, then it feels like, oh my God, that's a lot of time, right? So there is variation. And inherently in this, I also see an issue that we haven't touched on here, and maybe not in the study. We'll see where we go ahead. But one of the things that we are kind of chastising here is mainly the creative process, when we should be talking about the communications process overall. Because more and more, we are in this new communications economy where ad-supported media is not the only place where people are spending time. And the more we tailor creative and ads to platforms, the better we are. So the fact that 20% have to adapt their creative for 7 more channels, that is really an older school thinking, versus creating creatives for the platforms themselves, which tend to give better results. So as we look at this effect, and this is an issue with the industry overall, is how do we start looking at the communications process, the total communications process, so that media and creative are working together better to kind of get the best possible response.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Someone else was going to say something.
Anush, I am, 100% in agreement with what you just said. And starting when I looked at this data, I was like, I'm going to lose my job because I don't think I've ever deployed any creative work in 10 days at the Estee Lauder companies. 80% of our programs are actually done in a year and a half, 12 months, 9 months. Of course, e-commerce and social. Of echo. Do you guys hear me well?
There is an echo coming, Alexandra.
Hey, Jerry, something on your side.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing, but let me mute while Alexandra shares her thought.
You're being
Wonderful.
twice as impactful, Alexandra.
When it comes to e-commerce and social, they would like to be faster to market, for sure. And global companies like ours are having to adapt and respond to that by generating content or assets or mini campaigns much faster than 10 days. But it's certainly a challenge for global teams who have been working in longer lead times.
Yeah, these are all really brilliant insights that you all are sharing, and you're illustrating one of the frustrations that I have with this research. We have got such great key findings, but when you answer a question, you raise 2 or 3 more questions. And so really what we're seeing here is this is the symptom, but what is the root cause? And so I think we need to persuade our friends at Rocketium to do a follow-on study to pursue some of these root causes. But thank you to my colleagues for sharing these thoughts. And it leads us to a place of, okay, so what is the cost or the impact of this delay or the cycle time? And we actually do have some data that is the last key finding I want to share with you on this particular slide. And that is, we do have people who are wasting ad spends. 20% of all the participants in the study report that 7% of their ad spend is wasted due to delays in campaign go live data. And as I've shared before, it gets worse as ad budgets get larger. More people in the study report they're seeing ad spend wasted. So these are just some of the key findings. As I shared, the report goes into a lot more detail on all of these, but I wanted to just kind of lay the groundwork or share the landscape of what we learned with these key findings. And what I'd like to do now is just dive in perhaps a little deeper into a few areas. And of course, I know already from what we've experienced that my colleagues are going to have much to share. So let's get right into it. And let's look at the satisfaction question again. So you can see at the bottom left part of the screen, that's the actual question that we asked to collect this data. So this seems like when you see 70% satisfaction, that seems like, well, that's pretty high. A lot of people are satisfied with the process. One of the things we learned in marketing and customer experience a long time ago was that when you see neutral ratings, which almost a fourth of the people scored their satisfaction as neutral, we know that's not considered favorable or positive. So we have 70% who are satisfied, but 30% that are not. And something else that's worth noting, we did have the ability to segment the data in this study across B2B and B2C sectors. And we found that satisfaction was noticeably lower in the B2C sector. Just 58% versus 70% said they were satisfied. So let me pause to see if my colleagues have some thoughts to share, because I bet they do.
Based on what you presented just before, I think satisfaction is basically the wrong metric to look at. Apologies to say that, Jerry, because and this is revealing. That is what you learn as part of any study, is that to me we have been tainted by the current fragmentation, the difficulty in getting things out, and we have become a little bit numb to inefficiencies in the process. We kind of make do with things. We kind of reduce time where we need to, and we kind of stage some of these launches, for example, where we kind of put out one creative, then put out another one, and we have these make dos. To me, the question that really comes up and is bolder for me here is the opportunity cost. What is the outcome we are losing out on, and every brand is losing out on, that really demands us to look at this in a more clear way? That to me is a bigger reveal here.
No, Anush, listen, we can still be friends. I'm not offended that you said you're not sure that this is the right metric, and I don't disagree. I'll tell you why this was a good question to have in the study, because we have the ability, and we did this, to look at segments between satisfaction and dissatisfaction with the process. And really some of the insights that we share in the report really come out of segmenting the data across the satisfaction question. So it had some value for that reason. But I don't.
That shows you that there is a little bit of inertia in people that we need to kind of wake up, and say, you got to do something about this, because the real truth is that you're losing a shit ton of money.
Yeah, well, and the bottom line is in one we were able to measure to some extent. So great observation. So Tej or Alexander, either of you have any thoughts before we move on?
No, I just want to say that this question is like asking somebody if their baby is ugly, and nobody's going to say, of course, yeah, I know that. I'm ugly, my baby is ugly. Nobody's going to say that. So this kind of really questions how effective somebody is at their job, how good they're doing it. And so this was, like Jerry said, there was a reason to have this question, right? Which is to say, what is the sort of cognitive dissonance between somebody thinking everything is perfect to when you peel a layer or two, how well things are really working.
You need to tell people.
I love your analogy. If you ask me around friends and family if my baby's ugly, I'm going to say, well, no, of course not. But because this was an anonymous survey, perhaps we got a bit more truth than we might have otherwise. So let's then talk about another aspect of the survey. And we've already touched on this, and that is, what is the delay situation like? And you can see that almost half the people in the study report they're experiencing campaign go live delays because of issues in the creative process. We shared in one of the key findings that 7% of ad spend is wasted due to these delays, and that's for 20% of the participants. Now we can see how many of the study participants are affected by delays. And again, it's nearly half. They say that happens either frequently or very frequently. And once again, as I've shared the theme, the larger the ad budget is, the more likely you are experiencing delays. Over 60%, excuse me, of those who have ad budgets of $10 million or more tell us that they frequently or very frequently are experiencing delays. So you can see the question that we use to collect this information at the bottom of the screen. So I will yield
Jerry,
to my.
Let me interrupt again. This is a lovely metric that is an awesome conversation starter. Because to me, this is the bigger problem we have to deal with, is the opportunity cost that we are losing out. And delays is one of the opportunity cost impacts. To me, there are three others. One is collaboration, right? The impact of collaboration. Every one of our brands that I worked on always had an issue where their media and creative processes and timelines did not match. Making them match is a massive, massive undertaking in most companies. And the bigger the brands, the bigger the budgets, the more agencies they have, it becomes even more complex. And again, the more you create creative for the media at hand, you have at least a 30% increase in response. Second is connectivity. We are at a stage where we are looking at delays, where we are trying to kind of simplify everything in a world where consumers want more personal connectivity, more personalization. I want Jerry to speak to me differently than he's speaking to Alexandra, right? But we kind of avoid doing that hard work because it is so complex and we got to get the schedules and timings right. Lastly, the third one for me is all about creativity. This is a thing that we miss out in our efforts whenever we are scheduling stuff and whenever we are putting things into a process. Is Harvard had done a study about it 10 years ago, which basically said that creativity, the more creative your campaign is, it could have double the impact when it comes to outcome. But when you look at creativity in today's landscape, the overall creative index has been dropping because we are trying to deal with this fragmented, complex process that is out there. And the first place where we start to lose time in our process is let's kind of give less time for creative thinking, less time for insights, because we need to kind of put stuff out there. To me, all these three areas need to be connected by our process, which to me is more about a total communications process rather than creative ops alone, if that makes sense.
No, it makes tremendous sense. You know, these are very colorful insights that you're sharing. And I would say that in the report itself, there is some additional detail, not on everything that you just mentioned, but on some of the things. So I say that to encourage our audience to go check the report out, because I think they'll get, you know, at least answers to some of those questions that you just raised.
Alexandra, you were going to say something?
I love what you said, because I do have a lateness issues in all the brands that I work with. And when you go deeper into looking what's really creative lateness, the reasons vary by brand, they vary by year, but they are normally related to change in the organization, change in how we believe our products should be marketed. Do we have the right claims? Are the right conversations happening at product inception, and how that get cascaded into the marketing and then creative process? We are normally the last one in the funnel, and you see more of the lateness there, but it's normally not where the problem started. Should we all want to have zero lateness? I don't think so. I think some of that friction should continue to exist. I would say that for me, when a brand is 80%, 90% lateness, you know you have a big problem. Sometimes 30% lateness in what's not important, it's okay. But going back to what you said, I think, yes, we are becoming less creative. Our process is too complicated. We are putting too much work and too many assets out there, but is this good content? Is it interesting? Look at the Chanel video that was just released 2 weeks ago. It was one beautiful piece of content, while many of our brands are putting out thousands of pieces of content that were late and not that relevant or interesting. So going back to outputting work that is interesting, even if it's late, should be our overall goal, and not necessarily zero delays in the process.
Love what you said, Alexandra. And this is where, to me, you know, Satesh, Rakitian, like these are the companies that are allowing us and enabling us the ability to bring technology to our advantage. So there is more time we as humans and human intelligence can be spent on creativity, insights, things that really also bring a difference.
Great remarks, everyone. Let's move on to the next thing I want to share. And this is just really informational. We all know.
Wait, Jerry, sorry to interrupt you. I think your slide seems to have zoomed in. Is that true, Anush, Alexandra? Do you see that as well?
No.
Okay, maybe just me then.
Seeing the pie chart, what I'm trying to show right now is the pie chart that talks about the tools used to support the creative process. So if that's not what everyone's seeing, then I think the problem's on my end.
All good, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, great, super. And I think we all know, how important tools are to enabling the creative process. No disagreement there. It's just interesting to see how many tools on average are in use. So you can see in the pie chart that almost half of those in the study use 5 or more, and a few are using 10 or more tools to facilitate the creative process. So just kind of another benchmark bit of data out of this study. So what I'd like to do now is let's move into some of the impacts. And again, we are really just flying over at a very high level some of the things that this study found, but hopefully enough to get everyone's interest and attention in getting this report and benefiting from the data. So one of the questions is simply this: what's the impact? We've already talked about campaign delays, but what does it actually do to you? So we did ask the question. You can see the answer choices on the left-hand side of this graph. And I'll point out, we dug deeper here to better understand the impact of delays, because we wanted to know specifically how organizations are experiencing the consequences of delays. And 44%, that's the biggest response area, are seeing increases in workload, overtime, or stress. Probably no surprise to anyone. And that's both a hard dollar cost as well as a mental well-being cost. And then in second place, over 40% are suffering a loss of internal influence and or reputational damage. Only 7% of people in our study, that's the bottom bar where it's no impact, say they're not experiencing a negative impact. So delays, it seems, are hurting almost everyone, but in different ways.
And I'm glad that some bit of the human element also came into this, because we can always talk about what the business is going through, and businesses thrive, go up and down, but really it's the people who make all of this stuff happen. And if we don't look at that human cost of somebody working over a weekend, or somebody just having to rework, or the cost to creativity that we talked about because they had to redo something, or and we'll cover some of this in the Q&A, but a lot of questions are coming in about who is really causing the delays. Is it clients who are doing this? This could mean internal clients or external clients, but is it approval process? Is it a variety of tools? So I think it's good to see the human element in here as well.
Well, it is good, because we know there is a cost on the human side of the equation. No question at all about that. Something else that we have touched on already, we talked a little bit about wasted ad spend. And so here's a bit more detail on something I shared just a few minutes ago, and it's the breakdown of wasted ad spend. And what we did was we used percentage tiers. You can see those under the wasted ad spend column. So we used those percentage tiers to collect data. And while the overall average wasted portion of ad spend in this study due to delays was 7%, you can see that some have it worse. Almost 20% of people in our study fell into the 7% or more ad spend wasted range. So, again, we're trying to start to get some data that helps us quantify, what is the real cost here? What is the impact? And Anush, maybe this speaks to, at least tangentially, to the opportunity cost issues you raised earlier.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are so many aspects to it. Number one is we got to raise the floor and raise the ceiling. The floor conversation is the efficiency. in our process and making sure we are getting it done right. The ceiling conversation to me is the opportunity of making sure you're putting stuff that is done with the right intent in the right way. And that goes to collaboration of media and message, personalization and addressability, making sure we are in the right channels with the right stuff, and we are giving creativity its time and space so that we are more effective in the longer run, and not just efficient.
Yes. Okay. I don't want to interrupt anyone else who has something to share. Wow, we've already covered a lot of ground, 40 minutes into it, and it feels a little bit like drinking from a fire hose so far. So hopefully everyone's good with that. So we're about to go into our panel discussion. Satej, I know you're going to facilitate that, but go get the report. Please, we encourage you to do that. There is a QR code on the screen, and the report has some things we haven't touched on today, one of which is an action plan. It's not enough, in our opinion, to just say, here's what the landscape looks like, and here's where some of the issues are that you need to be aware of. Yes, that's certainly helpful, but we've also added some expertise in the report about, and here's what you can do. You know, if there are things you know you need to improve about your process or just make it better, even if it's already good, we've got some insights for you there in terms of an action plan. Then, of course, lots more detail. We touched on maybe 15% of what the report really contains. So this is a place you can go get that report. Satej, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you. We're going to have a lot more discussion.
Thank you, Jerry. And Anush, Alexandra, it was good to hear you chipping in as well with your thoughts. And in some ways, what I wanted to cover in the panel, some of those questions have been answered. Some of the Q&A questions have also been answered. We'll get to Q&A right after this. But maybe kind of combining both of those, just maybe starting with Anush, just want to hear what was the role of clients in this entire process? Like, how much of this A did you see in your day-to-day experience, and B, how much of it was driven by clients, whether approval process or just sort of changing their mind at the last minute, or maybe like Alexandra said, hey, you know, Chanel is doing something, we should be doing something, right? And just kind of changing how they operate.
Yeah, it's a complex system. So I would say it's never been only the agency, only the client. There are so many aspects to this that you learn, and it's a time and place where, you know, we need to be a lot more flexible in real time to things that may be happening. So we might get some learning on a particular creative that might not be good, or it might be that the product launch, you know, has some variations to it, something happened in the marketplace. So there are so many things that could go wrong. The question is, how do you set up a system where you can get most of it right, to Alexandra's point, because there's always something or the other happening. Are you delivering and are you creating a process for the best possible outcomes? That's the question you need to ask yourself every time.
No, absolutely. And Alexandra, I know some of these insights you had shared, but one thing I want to understand a little bit more from you, you talked about not being brought into the process at the very end, being involved in the beginning. The other thing that is usually not involved in the beginning in many places, want to understand from you, is data and analytics, both in terms of how the creative process itself works and also what creative you're making. Creative is creative, but there is a role that data can play in that as well. Does it play any role within your operations? Is this something that you can speak to?
It's so funny. We talk about the word data all the time, but are we effectively, really using data to drive most of our decisions in big and small companies, in big and small teams? The answer is not really, right? And I can only speak, I'm gonna speak in the world of ops, and then I'm going to let Anush speak in the world of media and creative in general. Today, what I've been trying to do is to measure my scope of work, the numbers of programs I'm supporting, the number of assets I'm creating. Am I getting better year over year? Are those asset costs getting cheaper? Is my team efficiency? Am I measuring velocity the right way? Am I taking a little bit of waste from my process and bringing it back to the company in growth? Can I do that comparing brand by brand and understanding the differences between them? As you saw in your research, Jerry, our tech ecosystem in operations and in creative is fragmented exactly because you do not have one system that can do it all. You are using Rike or Monday.com for project management. You could be using Tableau to give you better insights into the data you're collecting. But in the end of the day, most people are using broken systems, Excel, and lateness to drive their teams. That's the reality. So I think there is still a lot to be done in capturing this data that you know and redeploying it for a more efficient process and team that drive growth for the business, right? We forget that the creative team is actually working in the marketing or as part of a marketing organization to drive growth. We are not just making content because we love to make content.
Yeah.
Our creative directors would like to think so, but there is a reason for that work to be deployed.
Total, like I could not agree with you more. It's the analogy I could give is like we are all sitting in Ferraris driving at 10 miles an hour. Because that's the state of data in most places I've seen it, in that it's been effectively used to target audiences, but there's so much more to be gained when it comes to communications, because in this connection relationship business that we are in, insights matter. And all this data in our hands, still people are really hungry for insights, especially the creatives. They want to know, how do I be creative? Give me something that will really make me tap into the right mindset and tug on the right strings, which is not happening with data right now. That is still stuck in the old world. The other aspect to me is that when it comes to data, our advertising world is still stuck in the old age where I look at the entirety of all my audiences, say what is common amongst all of them, and create an idea for all of them being one. Versus in today's day and age, we need to kind of address different people based on their insights, based on what they do, how they live their lives, what is the echo chamber they are living in, and how do I kind of get that door open. And if we could use data towards that benefit, we are in a better place.
And I just want to add a couple of anecdotes to this, both in terms of operations as well as the final messaging that goes. Incidentally, this happened just yesterday. A customer was telling us. One, they said, you mentioned Alexandra, Rike, and Monday.com. In their case, they use a Jira. They had to make a big presentation to their one of their clients, and their team member literally went request by request in Jira, trying to say how many creators were asked for, because that's their report to say what was the creative output, how has it gotten better every quarter, and so on. So she spent half a day just kind of manually cataloging this stuff. Second, he said that we were talking about, again, how can data be used to make better creative decisions, this sort of upgrading the engine of the Ferrari. And this person said that we literally have email threads with the president of the company, the client side company, that the president says this should be the copy because this is what they think their customers want. And so with that great insight, they are saying the copy has to be this. And they are trying to fight it with data to say that for this audience, this sort of copy or this messaging does not work. But the president thinks it has to be something different.
Oh, I bet we all have scars from that.
Absolutely. And so I think we're coming close to the end of the panel. I want to give enough time for the Q&A as well. But I want all of you to maybe give your soapbox and just imagine the future a little bit and a magic wand to go with that soapbox. how do you see, given all the tech that is changing, what is it that you want? Maybe not where tech is going to predict, but what is it that you want if you had to imagine your ideal tech to help you on a daily basis? Jerry, I know you also have been a practitioner, so maybe we'll start with you. What is it that you want tech to do for you?
What do I want tech to do for me? I like the conversation that's already taken place about data. And, I have been around marketing for 4 decades now. I have the gray hair to prove it. And I've witnessed the revolution of marketers going from we're creative function and data doesn't really help us to now marketers understand you have to know how to use data and leverage it. It gives you a competitive advantage. And if you don't, you're just going to lose in the marketplace. I think now we're seeing that same kind of revolution spill over onto the creative side of things, which clearly is a creative function by its very name. But I think this whole notion of, the data and analytics is going to kill our creativity that used to afflict marketing is slowly kind of dissipating out of the creative side of the house, and it's good and it needs to. And Alexander, you made that point as well. And I think what we need are tools that make it easy for us to get the data we need. And I'm going to be very careful about what I say here, not to make our decisions for us, but to inform the decisions that we make.
Love that.
And since the NBA playoffs are starting, I can tell you how much the game has changed, because coaches and players have access to advanced statistics and they know that, let's say, the corner three works better than something else. And a lot of the game has changed. So it's not like the artists who are the players in that case. They are not playing a good game, or they are not as effective as before. It's just that data drives how they play and they get better outcomes, right? So everywhere there are artists could always do better with a little more guidance. And ultimately, like Alexandra said, it is in service of some business goals that we are doing this. What about you, Anush? What does your dream state look like with technology?
Listen, like my feeling when it comes to technology and media and our processes, there is no doubt in my mind that the media process, the way we are going, not just because of effectiveness, but for efficiencies, for the agencies to kind of drive margins up and stuff like that, it's going to become a software business more and more, the media side of it. The question amongst all this is, how do you not throw the baby out with the bathwater? How do you, in the obsession...
Beautiful baby or ugly baby?
Huh? Whose baby is it? If it's mine, I can't say anything. But this is the issue, is that in all the efficiencies that we try to drive, making sure that advertising communications overall doesn't lose out its effectiveness in driving outcomes, and make sure that brands stay healthy and relevant in these times. So this to me is the opportunity for us, and we're at that crux where we could either go full tilt on efficiency or make sure that both sides benefit.
Yeah. And lastly, Alexander, to you, your portfolio of brands that you manage, the responsibilities that you are taking on, there's a lot for you to learn, as you were telling us in another chat that we are having. What would this sort of technology co-pilot or assistant, if you had, what would it do for you? How would it make your life better? And what do you want from tech companies?
As a project manager, I go to the little details, right? So what really is my dream is get rid of the busy work. Who needs to take meeting notes if AI can do it for me? Who needs to go count rows in a spreadsheet to do a reporting to their president if AI can do it for me? But I am the one who should be the smart connection between all those things. That's what I want the role of creative operations to evolve to. we are having a seat at the table with the CMO, the Chief Creative Officer, and the president of the company, because we understand how work gets made, and there is a value in that. Going back to what Anush said, advertising has always been about art and copy, and it's no longer being art and copy anymore. It's art, copy, and tech. And those who are going to win in this age of AI are going to be the ones who know how to use tech. In the beginnings of the internet, for all of us that are old enough to have lived that difference in the late early 90s, the websites, what it propels creative work to be was for the first time interactive. I can touch it, I can change it. Then with mobile, I would say, it's about simplicity. All the apps became the one button app. You press a button, you get a car. You press a button, you get a villa. In Italy, what is AI or tech now going to do for us? We are making it, we're creating it. So there is a lot of future for creativity in this era. I think I'm already observing my teams playing with technology and creating, not just about removing some of their busy work, it's creating new things that they didn't know it was possible. So I feel very optimistic about creative operations and creative in our new era.
Oh, and this is exactly the sort of thing that software was built to do. Find things where there is a pattern, something that could be done predictably and in the same way, so that things that do not have a pattern, where every time there is nuance, there is some creativity that can be left to people, right? So I think this is exactly the theme of software, and AI is just another version of that is helping. And so there's a lot more to talk about, but we only have last few minutes. So we will move on to the Q&A. Thank you all for adding color to the report, as well as sharing your experiences. Maybe let me jump right off of the point that you made, Alexandra. Jason has a question. I'm going to quickly paraphrase it, that your argument on lateness was perfect. It's not only about let's make sure everything is on time, but let's even focus on creating the right stuff. So Jason's question is, what is the right stuff? If you had maybe 20, 30, 15% more time for your team, what would you want them to do? What is that creative or additional oomph that you would want your team to have?
At least in my brands, we keep talking about fewer and better. We never really do it. But we also know where our work has the most impact. Sometimes it's going to be about China. Sometimes it should be about North America. It doesn't mean that because we are making global campaigns in global companies that we should spread ourselves thin at all times. But the marketers and the brand presidents need to be bolder and say, you know what? For this one, I'm going to go all in China or North America or the UK. So I would love to see more of that happening.
And Anush,
here is the real scenario consumers live in, right? They live in a scenario where 50% of the time they are spending is in non-ad supported environments. But 98% of our time and money in our industry goes towards creation of ads. What I would love to see us doing more of is connecting with consumers the way they are connecting with media. For example, social media, right? Influencer activity is about 17 times more effective than regular ads, but only 1.7% of our budgets go towards it, right? Similarly, gaming, other channels as well. So as we think about this world of advertising, let's start thinking about communications and connections that we have with people that make us more relevant, because brands are losing their relevancy because they are speaking in ways that consumers are running away from.
Yeah, and maybe not exactly building on this, but building on that earlier point that we had of wasted ad spends. And Joe has a question saying, how do you define this wasted ad spend? Is it something that was very clearly put on a campaign that was not working? Is it not changing something fast enough? Could you give a sense from without naming names, what where have you seen budgets being wasted, especially because of delays or poor choices that were not data driven?
Who is this question to, Satish?
This is for you, Anush.
Okay, so I don't like, while there is wastage of stuff, right, where you could be spending, for example, optimizing your media. If you're not optimizing your media, to me, you're wasting your media. You're not getting the most out of it. That said, the bigger opportunity cost is not in the wastage, but in not getting to the right solutions and not getting to it the right way. This goes back to what I was saying earlier. Are you collaborating between media and creative? Are you creating that right scenario? Are you creating the right connectivity with your audience, with your consumer, with people? And lastly, are you doing it in a way that is most creative? If you are doing those three properly, with the new comms economy in mind, with all the changes going on, it is less wastage and more opportunity that you are giving to your brand for better outcomes.
Yeah, and I know some of this stuff we have already touched upon, but one thing I certainly want to bring up is this whole role of the culture that you are building, because wherever you are, it doesn't matter what the state of that is. As long as you are you have clear goals of where you want to go, you are constantly building a culture of improvement. Because let's say I'm spending nothing, to Anush's point, on influencer marketing. I heard something today in this webinar, maybe I want to try it. It works for me, maybe I do more of it, right? And if there is that culture of constantly improving, looking at tech, what Alexandra said, maybe I'm losing a lot of time in doing stuff in Excel. Can I automate that? Is there some software that could help? Can I change the way my teams upstream, the way requests come? Maybe can we get a seat at the table earlier? So I just wanted to call out the role of the culture that you're building in your team as well, and obviously the other teams that you're working with, which can go a long way in delivering those outcomes, because that is what this thing is really for. You have a team of people working towards a goal. The team should be happy. The goal should be clear. We should keep delivering on the goals. And there's a few more questions which we will not have the time to get to, but we'll figure out a way to reach out to these folks and answer that. Any other last parting thoughts from all of you?
You know, it was a great.
Sorry, go ahead, Jerry.
I was just going to say, Satej, to follow up what you said about culture. Back in the 1980s, there was a management guru named Peter Drucker, and he said something I'll never forget: culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you are correct. You've got to have the right culture in place, or none of this works.
Yeah, and like my only thought, added thought to this, Satish, is I just want to thank Jerry and you to invite me and Alexandra, obviously, over. I think the study is a great conversation starter. It's not just a report that people should download and say, hey, this is a data that I can use. Are you having the right conversations, to your cultural point, in your organization? And if this report can help you start that conversation, this is a time to do it.
Wonderful. Anything from you, Alexandra, or are we all good?
You have the slide as well there.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure to be here. If you are still listening to us at this webinar, you can find me on LinkedIn and get any of your questions answered. And I'm also hiring, so which is not common right now.
I'll reach out to you, Alexandra, on the hiring thing.
I want to thank Rocketium for sponsoring this research. I think it's very important research that we've done here.
Thank you, Jerry. And thank you, Anush, Alexandra, for joining and sharing your thoughts. Over to you, Theo.
Well, thank you all for an interesting discussion today. That was great. Just to remind everyone that the link to access the recording of this webinar will be sent to all participants tomorrow. And if you'd like to find out more about our upcoming events, courses, and webinars, please visit the Henry Stewart website. Also, don't forget that Creative Operations New York takes place on May 16th, so please do check that out if you're not already registered. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's session, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.